As you know, I said just a couple of minutes ago, this is what I thought that she would say, but it is still shocking to hear it. I mean, she has been Prime Minister since September the 6th. She is the shortest serving Prime Minister, I think, probably ever. She's got just one more week in office, she said, because the election to choose her successor will only last a week. As I mentioned to you earlier today, she saw Sir Graham Brady, who's the sort of shop steward for Tory MPs, chairman of the 1922 committee, and she has agreed with Graham Brady that the normal process for an election will be brought massively, well, it will be massively shrunk. As you recall, the process that led to Liz Truss's election was, I think, something like 3 weeks of elections with MPs and then 6 weeks going to members. She has just said that that electoral process will be done by the end of next week, which suggests to me that there will not be any ability for members, the 160-odd thousand members of the Tory party, to have a say, that this is going to be stitched up by MPs. The big question, of course, is who will replace her. I was talking actually to a senior member of the Cabinet about this only a few minutes ago. This particular member of the Cabinet said that they think actually Penny Mordaunt is emerging as the sort of compromise candidate who can unite the party. But that said, the candidate who has clearly the most support from the maximum number of MPs is Rishi Sunak. The problem that Rishi Sunak has is there are many MPs on the right of the Tory party who hate him with a passion, and the question is therefore whether he can unify the Tory party at this very challenging time for the government.
And Robert, whoever should be Liz Truss's successor, that is the main problem for them. It is unifying the party, which seems to be divided on a scale that hasn't been seen for many, many, many years, and with Labour so far ahead in the polls as well. This is a very, very big job for the next Prime Minister, isn't it?
It is a very, very split party. It was remarkable in recent days to see Liz Truss tack from the right, where she positioned herself during the leadership campaign, to employ people on the left of the party, like Jeremy Hunt as her new Chancellor, who has reversed all her tax cuts and is about to cut public spending. But that has alienated many on the right of the party. So, as you say, it's a very divided party. But we should also be under no illusion. It's not just uniting her party that is the challenge. She also is bequeathing to her successor a very serious economic crisis. We are only just through that astonishing market turmoil where government bonds were plummeting, the cost for the government of borrowing going through the roof. Now, the appointment of Jeremy Hunt and those tax U-turns has stabilised things, and the prices of those bonds has gone up a bit. The price the government pays to borrow has fallen a bit. The price that all of us pay to borrow has fallen a bit. So there's been stability brought, but the big questions: what other taxes to go up? Which bits of public spending should be cut? Those questions have not been sorted. In fact, until the chaos of yesterday, it was clear that what Liz Truss wanted to do was stay in office at least till Monday week, October the 31st, which is when the Chancellor is delivering his, effective budget. It's called a medium-term fiscal plan, when we will know the shape of some very painful spending cuts to public services and tax rises.
All right, Robert, for the moment, thank you very much. We're now going to go to the Deputy Political Editor, Anushka Stana, who is in the central lobby of the House of Commons. And Anushka, throughout the morning, there's been a steady stream of Conservative MPs calling for the Prime Minister to go. Now they've got their way.
Yeah, it became completely untenable. You know, in 15 years in reporting on politics, I've never seen anything like this. It felt as if the Conservative Party was imploding. Everyone you spoke to was saying that she was finished. The thing that was delaying them was those conversations about whether they could come to a unity candidate. Although, as one MP said to me, there's never a unity candidate in the Conservative Party. Often it's about who they think can win. And right now, they were staring down the barrel of defeat. David Davis, who was a former leadership Premiership candidate said to me, this is now an existential threat for our party. Just look at the polls. We had our own analysis done by Professor Colin Rallings. It suggested the party would go from 365 MPs in 2019 to just 109 with these polls. So that's why everywhere I go around Parliament, MPs were just saying to me, she has to go because we cannot deliver anything right now and we are going to face extinction as a party. Many are having conversations now behind closed doors about who could be the next leader. For example, the One Nation group, that's the more liberal side of the party. Some of them met this morning and the consensus, as Robert said, is that most of them want Rishi Sunak to be leader, but they know they've got a problem, that there are people on the right of the party who really don't want him. Just to give you an example, I spoke to an MP on the right of the party this morning who says if Rishi Sunak is our leader, we are finished as a party. They actually blame him for some of what happened. They think that his warnings about the market reaction actually led to some of what later came. Now, many others in the party think that is ludicrous, but they're starting to wonder whether Rishi Sunak cannot be the unity candidate, and therefore that's why those other names are coming up. Jeremy Hunt, who has impressed everyone with what he's done in the past few days, stabilising the market. But again, as Robert said, Penny Mordaunt, I keep hearing that name where I go. The question is, will they agree to something in here that means that it's just done by MPs and then all other candidates drop out, or will they all want to go to a short vote of members in which all of them might fancy their chances? As I understand it, offers have been made from one potential candidate to another and turned down. The question now is whether they can do something about this, because the word you hear everywhere right now is we need stability. And so we've all got to try and come up with what we can do as a party to go towards that stability.
And Anushka, you mentioned these conversations that will be happening throughout Westminster right now and throughout the day. But, you know, can the party regain power? Can the party regain credibility? Is it too late?
Well, it possibly is too late. I've never seen such a shift in conversation as I'm having right now with Conservative MPs. They used to talk about winning. Now they talk about how can we minimise the loss. Now, that said, it doesn't take much to change their fortunes quite a lot. I was telling you about that analysis by Professor Colin Rallings. You know, if they could just squeeze Labour's lead by 5%, that's something like 90 Conservative MPs who stay in place. If they can limit the swing to Labour to just 5%, they could remain the largest party in here right now. So the question is there a new leader who can take them to a win, or more likely what they're talking about, to minimise the loss for their party? It has been an unbelievable shift in credibility. Can you believe that just 5 months ago we were standing here talking about the Sue Gray report and whether Boris Johnson would survive? And since then, all of this has happened. I think one of the big trigger points for Liz Truss was that the reaction to the mini-budget did something that no Conservative MP could take at all, and that is that it pushed up the mortgages of many of their constituents. And when they went around talking to people on the doorstep, they heard that again and again, and her position became increasingly untenable.
All right, Anushka, don't go anywhere. There's lots more to talk about. But for the moment, for anyone tuning in right now, the news this lunchtime that Liz Truss has made a statement outside Downing Street just a few minutes ago. It was less than 2 minutes in length. Here's a reminder of what she said.
I came into office at a time of great economic and international instability. Families and businesses were worried about how to pay their bills. Putin's illegal war in Ukraine threatens the security of our whole continent, and our country has been held back for too long by low economic growth. I was elected by the Conservative Party with a mandate to change this. We delivered on energy bills and on cutting national insurance. And we set out a vision for a low-tax, high-growth economy that would take advantage of the freedoms of Brexit. I recognise, though, given the situation, I cannot deliver the mandate on which I was elected by the Conservative Party. I have therefore spoken to His Majesty the King to notify him that I am resigning as leader of the Conservative Party. This morning I met the chairman of the 1922 committee, Sir Graham Brady. We've agreed that there will be a leadership election to be completed within the next week. This will ensure that we remain on a path to deliver our fiscal plans and maintain our country's economic stability and national security. I will remain as Prime Minister until a successor has been chosen. Thank you.
Well, that was Liz Truss speaking just a few minutes ago, announcing her resignation, saying that she could no longer deliver the mandate on which she was elected. We've also heard from Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer, who is demanding a general election. Well, let's go now to Paul Brand, who is outside the Houses of Parliament. Paul, what happens now?
It's a good question, Lucrezia. What we know is that it'll happen very quickly, within the space of a week. And as Robert was saying earlier, that probably means that this is going to be something that is sorted out by MPs alone here in Parliament, rather than putting it to the membership again and having another elongated leadership contest as we did just a few months ago in the summer. It was pretty clear to me this morning that there was a bit of a divide of opinion within the party, a kind of front bench versus back bench view. A lot of the front benchers, including a cabinet minister who I spoke to today, said that October the 31st was the date they had in mind. They wanted Liz Truss to continue until then because of that economic stability that they were trying to achieve, that the new Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, is trying to achieve. They felt that that would be the sort of watershed moment to then consider changing Prime Minister. But it was also clear that there was such fury on the backbenches, particularly after last night's vote and all the chaos that surrounded it. And in the end, I think it is that impatience on the backbenches that has tipped the balance today. Ultimately, Sir Graham Brady, of course, who represents backbench interests, he went to see the Prime Minister, and he must have delivered that message to her that she no longer had the confidence of the party, as she's alluded to in her resignation speech today. The big question, though, as both Anushka and Robert have picked up on here, is who comes next? And I was talking this morning to the One Nation group of Conservative MPs. They're not naturally allied with Liz Truss, to say the least. They had deep concerns and reservations about her becoming Prime Minister. She's certainly not the candidate that they backed. So they have some power now in their hands to try and push the candidate that they think would be best to replace her. Maybe Rishi Sunak, maybe even Jeremy Hunt. I understand that they met this morning to discuss the options. Jeremy Hunt was ruled out in that meeting quite strongly by a couple of the MPs, and they left that meeting with no consensus, even within that one group, that one nation group of MPs, about who the next Prime Minister should be. So I think that is obviously going to be the focus over the next week. Can any consensus be reached? Can they bring the party back together behind just one candidate? They didn't manage it last time in the last leadership contest, so why would they manage it this time, unless they really truly do believe now that the national interest is at stake to such a degree that they have to reach a consensus?
Paul, you talk about the fury among the backbenchers, but also this lack of consensus. I mean, we really are witnessing astonishing, unprecedented scenes, aren't we, politically? I mean, just give us a sense of the mood in Westminster.
Yeah, it feels as though sort of one fire's burning and is sort of slowly smouldering and being put out as another one rages all of a sudden in another part of Westminster. So, for example, last night we had that resignation of the Home Secretary. That was smouldering quite frantically for a while. And this morning, certainly MPs on the right of the party who backed Suella Braverman in the leadership contest, because of course she ran in the summer too, they were pretty angry in questions with the Minister here in Parliament, questioning him about why the Home Secretary had to resign. You felt as though that was a row that was really beginning to take off. And then, of course, as I say, you've got this One Nation group of Conservative MPs also trying to push to get a consensus candidate from their wing of the party. And all the while, Liz Truss is trying to put out each of these individual fires. And I think in the end, they just engulfed her and she was unable to douse the flames. So the big question now, I guess, is whether the Conservative Party burns itself to the ground here. If it rows that much that it can't reach a consensus, that it can't come together now behind a Prime Minister, then there are serious concerns among many in the party that this could be the end of the Conservatives. Just one final anecdote, Lucrezia. I spoke to an MP this morning who was in tears, saying that they'd been a member of the party since they were a child, that they'd knocked on doors with their mother, who was a Conservative Party member herself, and that they now fear that this could be terminal for the Conservative Party potentially if they can't pull back together and prove that they are worthy of being a governing party.
All right, Paul in Westminster, thank you very much. Well, let's get some reaction now from Scotland. Our reporter, Louise Scott, is in Glasgow. Louise, How is Liz Truss's resignation likely to be received there?
Well, the First Minister of Scotland has always had a very interesting relationship with the Prime Minister, Liz Truss. Of course, during Liz Truss's campaign, calling the First Minister an attention seeker and saying the best way to deal with independence is to ignore her. So, First Minister has been quick to tweet her reaction, saying there are no words to describe this utter shambles adequately, saying it's beyond a parody. And the reality is ordinary people are paying the price. She is saying a general election is now a democratic imperative, and that is something the Scottish Labour leader Anna Sarwar also saying, that the entire Tory government has to go. First Minister hasn't actually had a formal meeting yet with Liz Truss, and she said she'll now wait for whoever will become the fifth Prime Minister during her time as First Minister. We're yet to hear reaction from the Scottish Conservative leader Douglas Ross. He was down in Westminster yesterday. As far as I believe, he's up in his constituency today dealing with constituency matters. He was someone who backed Liz Truss. We're yet to hear what he has to say about this resignation. A lot to do to work on how his party is doing up in Scotland as well.
All right, Louise in Glasgow, thank you. We're going to go back now to our political editor, Robert Peston, who is live in Downing Street. Robert, the latest reaction then?
Well, I mean, how many times have I stood here and said we are witnessing history, the resignation of Cameron after he lost the Brexit vote, the resignation of Theresa May, the resignation of Boris Johnson, and now another one. As you've been hearing, there is lots of pressure from the opposition parties for a general election, but we should not forget that we do not have a presidential system in this country. This is a parliamentary system. Parties get elected on their manifesto. It's not to say the Prime Minister isn't important, but frankly, unless a significant number of Tory MPs lose faith in whoever replaces Liz Truss, there is no prospect of an imminent general election. They've got a very clear majority. We are looking at the moment at a general election in 2 years' time under a new leader. So, frankly, all our attention will now be on who that leader is. Now, one of the reasons why I think people were thinking a general election was possible was because one of the characteristics of Liz Truss's time in office is she sort of ignored the manifesto that Boris Johnson got elected on. She tore up tons of it, and that actually was constitutionally a bit reckless, some would say. So one of the things I will be looking out for, whoever is elected to replace her, and as I've been saying, the two favourites are Penny Mordaunt and Rishi Sunak, whoever is elected, will they pledge to uphold that manifesto that was published in 2019, which, you know, in theory, was at least partly responsible for that very significant victory that Boris Johnson won back then. But, you know, let's just also focus on two other sort of firsts. There has been no modern period where we have had three prime ministers within the lifetime of a parliament. We're about to get that. And no prime minister, by the time that Liz Truss resigns, will have served for less time than she has. She's been prime minister for 45 days. She will go at roughly 52, 53 days. That really is just a sort of blink of an eye in terms of political history. Quite astonishing.
It is astonishing, Robert, and to think that only this morning we had the Transport Secretary, Anne-Marie Trevelyan, saying that, you know, Liz Truss would be staying in the job at least until tomorrow. It just really shows how much a state of disarray the party is in.
I suppose that's, well, you're certainly right, there is utter chaos, and whoever comes in has to sort of basically bring the party back together, calm things down, appoint people in Downing Street who also make decisions in a rational way, bring some order to all of it. But it was very striking when Anne-Marie Trevelyan was doing her loyal duty of going out and talking on behalf of the government this morning. She never once said she thought that the Prime Minister Liz Truss would lead her party into the next election. She simply said that she was sticking by the Prime Minister for now. And, you know, it turns out for now was just 3 hours.
All right, Robert, for the moment, thank you very much. Let's go to our North of England reporter, Sangeeta Lal, who is in Bolton for us this lunchtime. So, Sangeeta, we've just heard from Liz Truss, who has resigned as Prime Minister. What are people there saying?
Well, I mean, I've been speaking to people here all morning, asking them how they feel from day to day, how they feel with the rising cost of living and the situation in Westminster. There is one word that has been repeated time and time again, and that word is dismal. And I'm joined by Pauline and Elaine. You both have heard the news of Liz Truss resigning. How do you feel about Westminster at the moment?
Well, they haven't got a clue what they're doing, have they? I don't know what to say. Go on, Pauline.
Well, they couldn't run Parliament because the way they are going, that party's about all they can run. And to be fair, it's a good job she's gone, really, isn't it?
And I mean, just how difficult is it to get by from day to day at the moment?
Here in the north of England, it's very, very difficult, and no one cares.
Do you feel like no one in Parliament cares?
No one cares.
Yeah.
No,
We're
no one
struggling with bills, heating, food. You know, no matter how hard you try, we
the
are.
hospitals even, you're sitting 7 or 8 hours in a hospital waiting room before you get seen. It shouldn't be like this. We've paid into it, you know. It's not free. We've paid into the system, national insurance. It shouldn't be this way.
And what did you feel about when you've been seeing all of these, you know, scenes of described as chaos unfolding in Westminster? We now have another Prime Minister that's resigned. How does that make you feel about your day-to-day life?
It won't get any better. They're a joke. It's simple. They should have left Boris where he was, because the rest are rubbish anyway. Yeah.
You can't actually say they're rubbish, but
Well, not good, are they?
they haven't got a clue what they're doing. I mean, if they did, this country would be in a better state.
And you really believe that Boris Johnson should have stayed in power?
They should have put, well, to be fair, they all need to go, they need to put the country first and themselves last. It's like some kind of weird show that they put on. They're arguing with each other.
Well, thank you so much for your time this morning, Pauline and Elaine. So, quite passionate expressions here this morning about what is happening in Westminster, and perhaps not as much hope for the future as they had when Boris Johnson was in power.
All right, Sangeeta, thank you. We're going to go back now to our Deputy Political Editor, Anushka Astana, who's in the House of Commons and who's been getting reaction from Conservative MPs. Anushka, we're just hearing then from people who are genuinely worried about the cost of living crisis, how they're going to get through this, and now we have the latest political drama unfolding.
That's right, and I've been talking to MPs about it, and I'm actually joined right now by Simon Fell, who's the MP for Barrow and Furness, and who, if I'm right, Simon, you were just about to press send on a tweet calling for a new leader.
It was. My timing is excellent. Apparently every 106 days I'm right, like a stop clock.
Right. Why did it come to this?
Well, I think what we wanted was stability. So we've seen the results of the pandemic, we've seen everything we've had to live with as a result of that, disruption in the markets, and we just weren't seeing calm. And what we really, really need now is good governance. We need someone who can steady the ship. When Jeremy Hunt came in, we saw that in the Treasury, but we just weren't getting that leadership from the top. And the vote last night was a perfect example.
And tell me about Barrow and Furness. What are people telling you about this situation?
So when I've been out knocking on people's doors, what they've been telling me is they feel sorry for us. You know, they recognise the challenges we've had and what we've been through, but they're really worried about their future. And what they want is someone who's running the country, who's really got a grip of things, who can show them actually they're on their side. They're fighting every single day for them. And all of this stuff that goes on here, well, all this stuff going on here is a distraction. And the more distraction there is, the less able we are to get a grip, to get on and demonstrate for people we're fighting for.
Do you feel sorry for Liz Truss?
Oh, hugely. I think anyone who puts themselves forward for that job, anyone who does that job, deserves all the sympathy in the world. It is a hideous thing to do, especially in these circumstances. But, you know, she's shown she was pragmatic. She put Jeremy Hunt in, who didn't back her agenda at all, but has steadied the ship. And now she's stood down. She recognises we needed change.
And you're on the One Nation side of the party, is that fair to say? So the more liberal side of the party, I guess. Who do you want to be leader, and how do you want this to be done?
So I really want to see who comes out first, but I ended up backing Rishi last time round. I think he's...
You didn't originally, though?
No, so I backed Tom Tugg, another One Nation candidate. That's definitely the side of the party I'm from, but right now we need someone who we can all unite behind. because I think what the country needs to see is that we are here competently governing, putting rivalries to one side, putting disruption and machinations to one side and just getting on with the job.
And here's the problem you've got. So you supported Rishi Sunak. You would like to see, I presume, Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. You can say he was right about the financial situation, but there are colleagues of yours on the right of the party who say to me, your party's finished if he's leader. How are you going to compromise over this?
Well, I think what we need to demonstrate is that we're not just leading from the left or the right of the party. We are taking the truly talented people who've got experience under their belts, who know how to get into a department and run it well, and we're putting them all in cabinet. We're filling the ministries of state with people who know what they're doing. It doesn't matter what their political ideology is, it matters that they're governing for the country. And I think under Liz Truss we saw too much of people like her in government. We need that broad spread, and I think that's how you start to get the different wings of the party back together.
And obviously it's about, for you, the people of Barrow and Furness, but what about your party? Was your party on the edge of destruction through all of this?
Well, the polls weren't looking great, and for what it's worth, a poll is a poll. I don't really stand by where they were.
Would you have held Barrow and Furness with Liz Truss as leader?
Well, not on those numbers, no. But I think now we've got an opportunity to steady things, and that's what this has got to all be about, because whether I'm an MP in 2 and a bit years' time or not, the important thing is people recognise that the person in number 10, the team around them in number 10, is governing for them and in their interests, and that's where we've got to go.
And just finally, with your conversations, Jeremy Hunt's ruled himself out. There are issues with Rishi Sunak, though you would back him. What about Penny Mordaunt as a possible leader?
Penny is a very, very talented person. We have a lot of them on our benches. So I hope we can have a good, very quick contest, unify around someone and just get back to the business of running the country.
Has this been very emotional for you?
It's fair to say last night was not my best moment, but I'm feeling in a way quite relieved that we are where we are. We can hopefully just move on and get back to the day job.
Simon Fell, thank you very much. And so there you have it. That's what MPs are thinking about now. They knew that they wanted Liz Truss to go, and now they're concentrating on who comes next.
Anushka, thank you. Well, breaking news this lunchtime, the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, has resigned. Our coverage continues with Julie Etchingham at Downing Street.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Lucrezia, and good afternoon from Downing Street, where yet another monumental political moment has occurred behind us here. If you're just joining us, the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, has announced her resignation after only 45 days in office. After her disastrous mini-budget and after a chaotic vote in the Commons last night, Conservative MPs spent the morning queuing up to tell her to go. About half an hour ago, she said she would. She spoke to the nation, the podium was out here behind us, saying it was clear that she could not deliver the agenda she was elected to pursue.
I came into office at a time of great economic and international instability. Families and businesses were worried about how to pay their bills. Putin's illegal war in Ukraine threatens the security of our whole continent. And our country has been held back for too long by low economic growth. I was elected by the Conservative Party with a mandate to change this. We delivered on energy bills and on cutting national insurance. And we set out a vision for a low-tax, high-growth economy that would take advantage of the freedoms of Brexit. I recognise, though, given the situation, I cannot deliver the mandate on which I was elected by the Conservative Party. I have therefore spoken to His Majesty the King to notify him that I am resigning as leader of the Conservative Party. This morning I met the chairman of the 1922 committee, Sir Graham Brady. We've agreed that there will be a leadership election to be completed within the next week. This will ensure that we remain on a path to deliver our fiscal plans and maintain our country's economic stability and national security. I will remain as Prime Minister until a successor has been chosen. Thank you.
A pretty short statement and a reasonably calm Prime Minister as she delivered those words. Heaven knows what had been going on behind the door just in the few moments before that. Let's cross to Anushka now, who's in the Commons, for some reaction.
Thank you. Yes, I'm joined now by Andrew Bridgen MP. And look, there were MPs last night who were telling me about pushing letters of no confidence under the door of Sir Graham Brady, the chairman of your backbench committee. He went to see the Prime Minister this morning. How many letters of no confidence do you think he had received?
I think if he'd set the threshold at a third of the party, given the fact that on paper Prime Minister Liz Truss had a 12-month amnesty without challenge, if he'd set the bar at a third of the party, that would have been breached. I'm absolutely convinced.
So
I think
well
over 120 letters.
What led you to this place?
Look at the polls, look at the Prime Minister's performance in the chamber, the fact that she brought forward policies which she couldn't deliver. The market wouldn't let her, and effectively she'd actually had to adopt the economic policies that were espoused by Rishi Sunak, the man who lost the leadership election, and he'll feel fairly vindicated, I think, today.
Do you think he'll be the next leader?
I think there's going to have to be a coming together of all the major candidates, all wings of the party, and we need a government of all the talents from the Conservatives, and there's going to have to be some egos sacrificed for the greater good of the country and the Conservative Party. We're drinking in the last chance saloon. The public won't wear any more of this.
The last chance saloon for your party?
Absolutely. If we can't sort this out and all unite now around a Prime Minister and a new team representing all wings of the party, the only alternative will be a general election, and I don't think many Conservative MPs are looking forward to that.
So you think there could be a general election soon?
If we can't come together and form a solid coordinated government.
This is one of the most disastrous premierships that any of us have ever seen, given the length that it has gone on, given how much has gone wrong in that time. Whose fault is that? Is that the fault of Tory members?
Tory members bought into promises which ultimately could not be delivered. In the final, I supported Rishi Sunak. We did warn what would happen if those policies were enacted, and I think we've been vindicated. I think if we can move forward now with a cabinet and a government representing all wings of the party, and we can coalesce around a new Prime Minister, I think what's happened over the last 6 weeks will be forgotten to an extent in 2 years and seen as an aberration.
I don't mean to be rude, but you said that you have to push down some egos. I'll be honest, among MPs there are a fair number of egos. Is the whole party really going to agree on a top leadership team and on a top leadership person?
If we can't now, and whoever wins unite around them, well, the only alternative will be a general election. I think that will focus minds, given where the polling is at the moment. And if we can't do that, well, we'll deserve all we get from the electorate. I think it would be a great shame, because I don't think the electorate will forgive us, given the situation in Ukraine, the fuel prices, the cost of living crisis has got to be dealt with. They're looking for now stable and competent government. If we can't deliver that, then we have to get out.
When was the moment that this became inevitable?
Oh, it was inevitable over a week ago. The events of yesterday, Suella Braverman's sacking or resignation, and the bit of a debacle in the chamber last night over the chief whip.
Bit of a debacle?
I was there.
Have you ever seen anything like it?
I've never seen anything like the goings-on we've seen in Parliament. I don't think the public have, and that's why we're languishing.
And the public are fed up with it, aren't they?
They're as fed up of it as most of the Conservative backbenchers. We've now got a chance to put that behind us and move forward. We either grasp that opportunity, there aren't any more opportunities coming our way, and we don't deserve any more if we drop this one.
And just finally, on a personal level, how are you feeling about Liz Truss right now?
On a personal level, she'll be tremendously bruised. I think she's looked shell-shocked the last week or two, to be honest. She's made the right decision. She's done the honourable thing, and my heart goes out to her that speech that many Prime Ministers have had to give, not necessarily after only a few weeks in office, is tremendously painful. It takes a lot of courage. And, what I will say is she's a proper Conservative. She tried to deliver on her manifesto pledges that she was elected on, but that wasn't tenable.
OK, Andrew Bridgen, thank you very much. And this is the trouble that the Conservative Party has right now. They all want to agree. But how does a party with such disparate views, with over 300 MPs, possibly agree and unite around one candidate? It's going to be quite a rocky week for the party.
I think that's saying something for sure. Anushka, thank you for the moment. And you joined us again in Downing Street alongside Robert, who was here with me when we saw Liz Truss come out to make her statement. I mean, for those who are just joining us, Robert, just take us through what happened and what happens next.
So we're going to get a week-long election contest. We're going to find out very soon from the sort of General Secretary, as it were, of the Tory MPs, Sir Graham Brady, what the rules of that election will be. But Liz Truss has already told us it's only going to last a week. That implies to me that the decision is going to be taken only by MPs, not by the members. And she, for me, it was obvious she had to go 6 days ago. I was in the room that's just behind you in Downing Street, where they hold press conferences, and that was when Liz Truss came out, told us that she'd sacked her Chancellor, she was tearing up the mini budget, and she sort of said she got it. I don't know if you remember, but I said to her, look, you've done enormous economic damage. Your party's reputation for, economic competence has been shredded. That's probably the greatest asset it had. Will you apologise to your members and to your party? And she didn't. She just sort of said, I'm doing the right thing now. And she sort of walked off looking, truthfully, very shaken, almost tearful. And she sort of confirmed today that was the moment when she felt she couldn't go on, because you heard her say that what happened when she reversed the mini budget and appointed Jeremy Hunt to put up taxes, to cut public spending, is the entire mandate that she'd set out to members just this summer for why she'd be elected. She was elected on a mandate actually to cut taxes. All of that was shredded, all of that was gone, so she had nothing left of that.
It was only just 24 hours ago she was saying, I'm a fighter, not a quitter. What has happened in the intervening hours? And we saw that absolute debacle in the Commons last night. But what happened from dawn break this morning that accelerated this process?
Just what always happens in these situations, which is after the initial shock that all MPs felt last week at the way that their party had been really damaged. And we shouldn't forget that Labour is now something like 35 points ahead in the polls. That 35% margin is actually more than they polled in the last election in 2019. And, if those polls turned into a reality, the Tories would be wiped out. Now, the point is, initially, it was like Tories having a death in the family. They were in shock. They didn't know what to do. But as time has gone through, they recognised that she wasn't the person who could steady the ship and turn things round. That message has been delivered, and she's faced up to reality. She's resigned.
OK, so who's in the running then? What are you hearing?
So there are two serious candidates. One is Rishi Sunak, and his claim to go there is that all through the summer, he said her kind of tax cuts would be devastating for the economy, devastating for all of us. They would undermine our prosperity. Turns out he was right. So if Tory MPs want to choose the person who seems to be on the right side of the really important economic argument, they would pick him. But amazingly, some on the right of the party think he's, believe it or not, a socialist. That's the term they use about him, because he put up taxes and he put up public spending. And so there is another candidate, much less known in the country, Penny Mordaunt, who's been performing really well in the Commons. People like her, and if they're looking therefore for a candidate who could unite, Anushka was talking about how divided this party is, Penny Mordaunt might be chosen as the candidate who can bring these warring factions in the party together. OK, for the moment, whilst we grab some umbrellas, we'll leave it there and we'll cross, because of course this is a story with nationwide impact. We're going to cross to Wales now, and our reporter Rhys Williams, who is live outside the Senedd in Cardiff, for some reaction there, Rhys.
Yes, indeed. I was going to say that the Prime Minister and the Welsh Government had a poor relationship, but the truth is they didn't really have a relationship. We know, of course, that the Prime Minister hadn't actually spoken to the First Minister, Mark Drakeford, on the phone, but we have had a reaction from Mark Drakeford within the last few minutes. saying this has been a complete and utter failure of government, with everyone in this country now having to pay the price. The deep division within the UK means that any successor will face the same challenges. So a general election is now the only way forward for the country, he says, perhaps unsurprisingly. We've also had a statement from the leader of the Welsh Conservatives, Andrew Davies, who's known for his loyalty to UK Conservative Party leaders and prime ministers. He says the Prime Minister has done the right thing and stood down. People, wherever they live in the United Kingdom, are rightly concerned about the cost of living crisis, and the new Prime Minister must grip this situation quickly and provide leadership, confidence and hope to people across the UK. And the Conservative Party must rise to this challenge and deliver for people across Wales and the United Kingdom. And tensions really have been high here at the Senedd in Cardiff Bay over the last few days. In particular, if you might remember a couple of days ago, those remarkable scenes that we showed you from inside the Senedd chamber with the First Minister, Mark Drakeford, totally losing his temper, shaking with rage as during an exchange with Andrew Davies over the Welsh ambulance service, which is under a lot of pressure, of course, failing to hit its targets. And it's run by Labour here in Wales, of course, but we heard the First Minister accusing the leader of the Welsh Conservatives of opportunism, of course, saying that it was the mess being caused in Westminster that was largely to blame. So, of course, a really tense situation here, but that's the initial reaction here from Wales.
There will be some parity.
And how disappointed are you? Just one more question. How disappointed are you in this? This is the third Prime Minister in 4 months. The public must be looking at this thinking, what on earth is going on? This is the governing party.
Absolutely.
And they are not running the country.
And I think we're deeply conscious of the imperative of the national interest of resolving this clearly. Thank you.
Should there not just be a general election, Sir Graham? Should there not just be a general election? How can you continue to keep deciding the next Prime Minister?
Isn't the matter. Will there definitely be two candidates going forward to membership? The party rules say there will be two candidates unless there is only one candidate.
So if somebody drops out, it could only be one.
If there is only one candidate, there is only one candidate.
Do you expect that to happen?
I really can't give you any more detail.
Whose idea, again, was it to have this contest truncated to 1 week? Was it Liz Truss's idea, or was it your proposal?
I think it's a matter on which there is a pretty broad consensus.
And is that because of the relaxed
stands?
Are you live?
Thank you.
Are you live?
Ian.
So we just caught a few lines there from Sir Graham Brady. I'm also following this from Paul Brand, who you could hear throwing questions to Sir Graham. Robert's alongside me here. One of the key points that Sir Graham Brady made there, he's saying he's meeting with the officers of the 22 committee today and another meeting of the party board to work out how to conduct a ballot by Friday the 28th of October. So this is still in motion in terms of working out how on earth to effect this. And apparently, according to Paul, party members will be getting a vote.
So they will obviously therefore be getting a vote electronically. Now I have to say, over the summer when they had electronic voting, it wasn't secure and they had all sorts of trouble with that. So I have to say they are taking tremendous risks as it happens, saying they're going to get everything done by next Friday. I assume if there are two candidates, there will have to be some kind of televised hustings. Perhaps you'll have the pleasure of doing that. You did it so brilliantly last time.
What a thought.
But so, I mean, yes, I mean, obviously, you know, what Sir Graham Brady set out is an incredibly speedy process for MPs to make up their minds, and then presumably on Wednesday or Thursday next week, you know, members told, press a button on your computer and tell us who you want. Now, you know, I'm sure technology experts who we'll be talking to at some point will say there are tremendous risks. You know, we've got sort of bad actors like Russia involved in all of this. Risks that this kind of thing this kind of process could be abused. But anyway, there we are. It's going to be speedy, but we don't quite know yet how it's going to be done.
And the fifth Prime Minister in 6 years, that will amount to.
I mean, it is incredible. We've been joking recently about 4 chancellors in 4 months. I mean, one of the aspects of all of this that actually, if you are a patriot, I think we all are, is that quite a lot of the rest of the world is slightly laughing at us at the moment. We had this sort of reputation for having very stable government, stable parliamentary system. It is true that compared to some countries, power passes peacefully. But in the past, British politicians have mocked other countries, like Italy, for the numbers of, for the rapidity with which governments fall and, new leaders get chosen. Well, frankly, we look a bit like Italy used to look.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking to a German journalist recently, and she said she could hardly bear to sort of send another story back because she actually felt sort of quite mournful about what she'd been witnessing here.
And I sort of understand that reaction. I mean, I spend quite a lot of time talking to businesses and investors, both British and overseas ones. And actually, one of the reasons they've traditionally backed Britain is because of the stability of our system. And there was a comment in an analyst's report by somebody I respect who just said Britain's now got a reputation for being badly governed, which is a pretty depressing thing to read.
Well, we can cross now to Paul. Thanks for the moment, Robert, who's got another MP with him. I think, Paul, I can't see it, but I know you'll take us through it.
Yeah, hi Julia. I have got an MP just standing by, but let's recap for a moment there on what Sir Graham Brady has just said in this huge statement as he walked out of Parliament to decree how the next Prime Minister will be chosen. And we know it will yet again be down to Conservative members. He confirmed to me when I asked him in that statement that it will be a vote by Conservative Party members that selects the next Conservative Prime Minister. Of course, they'll go through a process here in Parliament too to narrow down the candidates. MPs, as they did last time around the summer, will narrow down the candidates. He said that process should be concluded by next Friday, and that is key, of course, because we've got that budget, or whatever they want to call it now, on the 31st of October. So that will mean that we've got a new Prime Minister in place before then, presumably to tweak things again in terms of economic policy, potentially, before that statement is announced on the 31st. He said he's meeting with the 1922 executive, so the officers of that powerful committee that decides internal party procedure. He's having that meeting today. Also a meeting of the party board, which is a separate authority, and they will work out the exact rules. He wouldn't answer questions, for example, on what the threshold would be for MPs. How many votes would candidates need to get in order to proceed to the next stages of each round? There's been some suggestion that it could be quite a high threshold in order to expedite the whole affair. But let's bring in Richard Holden now, who's been patiently waiting here in the rain. Thank you so much.
No problem, Paul.
Richard, a lot going on this afternoon. Firstly, your views on expediting this process and choosing the next Prime Minister within a week and going yet again back to Conservative Party members to choose a Prime Minister on behalf of the nation.
Well, I think it's going to be a quick process now. I think what we've got to have is a situation in which the markets are stabilised. They've stabilised a little bit now, but we've got to get that economic confidence back in the country. I think we've seen, I was really glad that Liz reached out after the leadership contest and brought me into a junior PPS position. That was good, but I think it's quite clear that she just doesn't command that confidence in the parliamentary party. So sadly she's got to go, but we have to have a quick process in order to get everything moved on very quickly now.
You supported Rishi Sunak last time around. You did a lot of work on his campaign. Will he run again?
Certainly he'll run again. I think it's really important that whoever we select now, though, is somebody who's got that real economic competence background, somebody who's known by the country, because that's what we need. We need to have that strong, steady hand on the tiller at a really difficult time, not just here, but around the world. We've seen all those issues in Ukraine recently, driving the prices across the world higher, and also those issues here at home. And we need somebody who can really pull the country together, and somebody with a track record of helping people out across the country in these really difficult times.
So, of course, no surprise that he'll run again, no surprise that you sound as if you're absolutely going to back him again, but can he bring the party together around some form of consensus? Because we saw the vitriol back in the summer between the final two candidates, Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss. It was a really divisive campaign by the end, and a lot of MPs who back Liz Truss really don't like Rishi Sunak. So is he the man to really unite the party?
I don't think that's true. I think there's always going to be the differences between candidates are always going to be exaggerated because those are the things which are the differences. The truth is the Conservative Party agrees on 95% of stuff. And it's always those differences which get exaggerated. I'm sure that Rishi could be certainly a candidate to bring people together and really drive, I think, what's so important at the moment, which is that economic competence message. That's what we have to go back to the country with. The country needs strong leadership, and it needs decisive economic leadership at this time. Jeremy has already come in and started to stabilise things, but now we need to move forwards. And I think Liz has done a right thing today, and a courageous and a really difficult thing as well. I like her personally, and it must have been a really difficult decision for her.
Just lastly, before you get absolutely drenched here this afternoon, some MPs still hold it against Rishi Sunak that he resigned from Boris Johnson's cabinet and that precipitated the downfall of the Prime Minister. Some people are saying, bring Boris Johnson back instead. What do you make of that idea?
Look, I was on Boris' leadership campaign as well and campaigned for him to be leader. I didn't resign at that point. But the key thing is that actually there was about 70 members of the government who resigned at that point. Now we've got to look to the future. We've got to look to that. And what the people want is probably get politics out of their main TV screens every night about what's going on in the country. What they want is economic stability. What they want to know is that somebody's got the steady hand on the tiller to really deliver for the future of the country.
And just lastly, you won a Red Wall seat in the last election. How are you going to resist calls for another general election from your constituents?
I mean, my constituents don't want another general election. I think what they want to see is strong leadership and in their interest at the heart of the country. And I really hope that over the next few weeks we'll definitely see that returning to the country.
Richard Holden, thanks so much for your time this afternoon and for getting absolutely drenched here with me this afternoon. Julie, back to you in what I'm sure is also a very wet Downing Street.
Yeah, funny that. It is a little bit. In the last few minutes, the Labour leader, Keir Starmer, has been giving his reaction.
Well, what a mess. And this is not just a soap opera at the top of the Tory party. It's doing huge damage to our economy and to the reputation of our country. And the public are paying with higher prices, with higher mortgages. So we can't have a revolving door of chaos. We can't have another experiment at the top of the Tory party. There is an alternative, and that's a stable Labour government. And the public are entitled to have their say, and that's why there should be a general election.
So it's Keir Starmer speaking just in the last few moments, and Robert, just an instant reaction to that. He's calling for a general election, but concretely there is no clear path towards that happening, is there? I mean, people will be asking that question. They'll need to know what mechanism, if anything, there is.
No, he can call all he likes. I mean, as I said to you earlier, this is a parliamentary system. It is not a presidential system. Parties are elected on their manifestos. If a leader goes, it is perfectly proper for the leader to be replaced by, a government. Now, let's be absolutely clear. We are in uncharted territory. We've never seen 3 prime ministers in the course of a parliament, and that is what we are now going to see. And of course, there are probably millions of voters who think this is not proper. To have that level of change, because obviously we are a much more personality-based system than we used to be. There'll be plenty of people saying, they want a general election, that they didn't vote for Rishi Sunak or Penny Mordaunt or whoever comes next. But unless Tory MPs, and they have a clear majority, decide to have a general election, unless there's a terrible split down the middle, or for some bizarre reason they just decide to go to the country early, and this would be like turkeys voting for Christmas, given the opinion polls, there is no route for Keir Starmer to get his general election.
OK, for the moment, Robert, thank you very much. Let's go back to Anushka, who's with an MP who's quite keen to get Boris Johnson back. Anushka.
Yeah, that's right. I do want to talk about Boris Johnson, who was just mentioned, because actually we had some exclusive polling on Robert's show last night, which was interesting. Among the general public, Rishi Sunak was in the lead, but among Tory voters, Boris Johnson was in the lead. And there are MPs, like Paul Bristow, who's the MP for Peterborough. You want him back?
Well, all I know, I was in the constituency in Peterborough just at the weekend. I went to Diwali Festival, I went to the Great Eastern Run, and I even did a bit of campaigning. And the message loud and clear from ordinary, decent people of Peterborough, Conservative voters, was bring back Boris. Now, look, it's a fast-moving situation. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if Boris is going to throw his hat in the ring. All I do know is just 6 months before the 2019 general election, I fought a by-election where I came third. We were 19 points behind in the polls then. Boris Johnson became leader of the Conservative Party, became Prime Minister, and then we went on to win that in a record general election victory.
A lot has happened since then. Boris Johnson went through scandal after scandal. His approval ratings plummeted, and something like 70 members of the government resigned.
Yeah, but I think we're in a similar situation now, where the polls are looking perilous. I think we need a proven election winner, and the only person that I can see who can win us back those seats is Boris Johnson. Now, look, let's see what happens. I don't know who's going to throw their hats into the ring. We don't know what's going to happen. It's all speculation at the moment.
You need a lot of MPs to back him. Is that realistic?
But I think a lot of my colleagues owe their seats to Boris Johnson. We won in the Red Wall. We won those seats that we'd never won before. And Boris Johnson is still very popular in those constituencies and places like Peterborough. So let's just see if he, I don't know if he wants it, but let's see if he's a candidate. I think he'll do very well.
There was a lot of MPs who supported Boris who felt that Rishi Sunak betrayed him, and in part were driven by that towards Liz Truss, backed Liz Truss over the summer, and other people in the party blame people, perhaps including yourself, for this situation. Because if it wasn't for that betrayal narrative, they say Rishi Sunak would have had a better chance.
Well, to be honest, I didn't want to be in this situation in the first place. I never wanted Boris Johnson to go. He won that mandate, and I think he deserved the opportunity to govern and then have his judgment based on the British people should have made that judgment, not my Conservative colleagues. But that was then, and this is now. We're 19 points behind in the polls. We've got lots of seats where we're looking that we might be wiped out in. Boris Johnson turned it around again. He turned it around once, he could turn it around again.
And if that were to happen, if that were to be a thing, what chance do you think of him being voted for by members?
Well, I think you were saying that you did a poll. I think if it does go to the membership, and again, let's wait and see what the rules are going to be. It may have changed while I've just been on air. This is a fast-moving situation. And as I said, we don't even know if Boris Johnson wants to do it. But I think if he was in those final two, the members would vote for Boris Johnson.
And if he were to do it, he's still facing a Privileges Committee investigation here in Parliament. He could be found to have misled Parliament in just a few months' time.
Well, again, let's just see what happens in the next few days. We don't know what, we can speculate, we can talk about what's going to happen. All I know is that the public out there wanted Boris Johnson in 2019. He had that mandate, and he could go on and govern again.
Just finally on that general election point, you say that Boris Johnson has got a mandate. Does that mean if it's another candidate that they would have to go to a general election?
I'm not saying that at all, because I don't know who's going to stand. I don't know what's going to happen. But I know the person who does have a mandate from the members and from the country was Boris Johnson in that victory.
OK, Paul Bristow, the question for Boris Johnson will of course be, can he get the support of enough MPs? A lot will not want him to come back, but clearly he's got some big support as well.
Thank you very much, Anushka. And from Downing Street, I'll hand back to Paul, who is with the leader of the Liberal Democrats.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. Liz Truss, if you'll remember, went into Downing Street on a pretty rainy day, and here she is resigning on an absolutely torrential day here on the Green. But let's get the reaction from the slightly wet leader of the Liberal Democrats, no offence, Ed Davey. And I'm presuming you want a general election.
You're right. Liz Truss trashed our economy, and before her, Boris Johnson failed our country. The Conservatives have shown time and time again they're not fit to lead our great country. And what we don't want is another Conservative Prime Minister lurching from crisis to crisis. We need to fix this. And although the Tory party we know is very divided, we need Conservative MPs to do their patriotic duty and work with opposition MPs so we can get the general election and let the British people have their say.
Would that not create more instability, though? And the Conservatives do still have a mandate from just 3 years ago. Isn't it better to continue through this economic crisis now, have that continuity of government, rather than throwing everything to a general election?
Every minute the Conservative Party is in government creates this economic chaos and this political chaos. They've shown they're not capable of coming together and delivering what they promised to deliver. That's why a general election is the only way out of this. That can restore credibility, political stability, and we can get rid of these dreadful Conservatives.
We know a general election is very unlikely to happen. The Conservative Party is in no frame of mind for turkeys to vote for Christmas, essentially, given the polls right now. So when we're being practical about it and looking around at the candidates who are likely to be the next Prime Minister, who do you think would do the least amount of damage from a Lib Dem perspective?
Well, listen, you say the general election is not possible. I think it could be possible. And moreover, when your poor viewers are paying those high energy bills, those high food costs, ever-increasing mortgage payments, they want to see real change.
What about Rishi Sunak? Because he had the ideas originally, which Liz Truss contradicted, and obviously went through with the mini-budget, which created some sort of market turmoil. Do you think Rishi Sunak would do a better job?
No, I don't. He didn't deliver real help for people's energy bills. He actually made things worse by some very unfair taxes, which hit people on low and middle incomes. He took ages to even begin to follow the Liberal Democrat idea of a windfall tax on the huge profits of the oil and gas companies. So Rishi Sunak was not this great chancellor at all. I'm afraid the Conservatives, whether it's Rishi Sunak, Jeremy Hunt, Boris Johnson or Liz Truss, they've shown themselves unfit to govern our great country. And the only way I can see out of that for your viewers, so they can get help and they can know that the government is truly in control, is to get rid of this Conservative Party from government and have that election.
You mentioned Boris Johnson there. Of course, he does still have a mandate, arguably, from the 2019 election. There's a campaign already. We're just hearing from the Conservative MP, Paul Bristow, there on our programme, to bring Boris Johnson back. What do you make of that?
He lost the trust of the British people by his deception and by not following the rules that he imposed on everyone else. People haven't forgotten that. People know that Boris Johnson let them down in their hour of need, and they don't want to see him back. Frankly, I don't think, and the voters I talk to in my constituency, they want to see any Conservative leader. They do want real change, and they do want the Conservatives out. And I, as a constituency MP representing them, and as the leader of the Liberal Democrats, want to make it clear we will work tirelessly with MPs from other opposition parties and from the Conservative Party to deliver the real change our country needs, and that starts with the general election.
All right, Ed Davey, leader of the Liberal Democrats, thanks so much for your time this afternoon. So there you have it, Julie. I mean, no surprise that the opposition parties want an election, particularly when you look at the current polling, which suggests the Lib Dems, as well as the Labour Party, would do incredibly well from the Conservative Party's woes. But right now, as things stand, the only election that's due to take place is one of Conservative members, and those details are still being decided.
Indeed, and one that's supposed to draw a conclusion, Paul, within just over a week's time. Well, we can cross now to our North of England reporter. There'll be many people in constituencies in the North of England, of course, who've been promised so much by the Conservative government. We're going to cross to Bolton and Sangeeta Lal, who's been getting reaction there from people that the Prime Minister's resigned. What have they been saying, Sangeeta?
Well, actually, quite a few people here today have been in complete shock. Obviously, there was speculation that Liz Truss might go, but I'm joined by Amber and Brenda. I actually broke the news to you that she's resigned. We've just heard Richard Holden, MP for North West Durham, saying that what the public definitely don't want is a general election. What do you think should happen next?
I feel like general election should happen. Give a voice to the people instead of guessing what the people want in the end of the day. And I'm glad Truss is out of the MP and the lettuce beat her.
And the lettuce beat her. And how do you feel about the way that the government have dealt with this whole situation since Boris Johnson left and now Liz Truss?
I think they did poorly, honestly, because the pound started to crash and a lot of people have been having trouble keeping heating on and just everything
just
in
getting
general.
by from day to day.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I know, Brenda, that's something that you've been very conscious of. Just how difficult is it for you at the moment?
I think it's chaos. It's absolutely chaotic at the moment. It's hard every month now to budget for the gas and the electric. And like Amber was saying, with the pound at the moment and the Bank of England increasing the mortgages, we just don't know whether we're going to have enough money every month to be able to afford it, simply just to keep the house warm for the children.
And specifically what you're talking about was the interest rate rising, wasn't it?
Yeah, the interest rates on the mortgage. Obviously, I'm a homeowner and I've got to find extra money to pay for the mortgage as well as the gas and the electric. And Christmas is on its way, and with two children, how are we going to afford to buy presents at Christmas? If it's a choice of presents or heating the home and paying the mortgage,
what do you think the solution is? Obviously, the Mayor for Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, has tweeted in the last hour saying that there must be a general election, as well as other people announcing the same push for a general election today. But other MPs in the Conservative government say that's not what should happen. What do you think is best to happen next?
Absolutely, there needs to be a general election. The people need to voice their opinions. That's not happened so far, and they can't just take that decision away from us.
What do you think about some MPs who are coming out in the last few minutes saying that members of the public lost faith in Boris Johnson after everything that happened? How do you feel?
I think we've lost faith in general with the government, with any party, and the people have lost faith. It doesn't matter who's coming along now at the moment, they're not keeping to their promises.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. One of the main priorities that I'm hearing from so many people that I'm speaking to here in Bolton North East is also about the levelling up policy. It was one of the main reasons so many people here voted Boris Johnson in. They believed in him, they believed in the policy. They did not believe that Liz Truss could deliver it, and that is what they want out of the next Prime Minister.
OK, Sangeeta, thank you very much indeed for that. We can cross to Anushka, who's in the Commons now, with a voice from Labour, I believe, Anushka.
I'm about to give you a voice from Labour, Jonathan Ashworth, who is just behind me and is going to join us. But obviously what Labour are now really pushing for is a general election. The problem they've got is that there is no mechanism with which to force it. If the Conservative Party don't want a general election, they don't have to have one. And there might be intense pressure on them to do that, but they're not totally convinced that they want to, particularly given the polls. Jonathan, can I just ask you what your reaction is, first of all, to this?
Well, now, it's pretty clear that the Conservatives have no mandate whatsoever to govern this country. The economic crisis people are facing with soaring mortgage rates is a consequence of decisions taken in Downing Street. People are facing mortgage rates of hundreds of pounds more a month because of Conservative ministers. And the idea now that Tory MPs in here can stitch together and force upon the country another Prime Minister by not involving the public whatsoever is completely unacceptable.
It might be unacceptable to you, but
unacceptable.
they don't have to give you a general election.
I think the country have had enough, and it's time for a general election now, and we need a Labour government to clear up this economic mess.
You're talking about an economic mess, and it is a crisis. And, you know, we've seen from our reporters, people like Daniel Hewitt in North Shields, talking to your constituents in Leicester, we've seen how bad things are right now. Is what the country really needs a 3-month general election whilst politicians squabble, rather than perhaps you swinging behind a new candidate on the Tory side and supporting them to fix this?
These Conservatives have given us a crisis. They gave us a mini budget which led to a run on pension funds and soaring mortgage rates. It's been absolute chaos because of these Conservatives. The idea that the people who created this crisis are the people who to fix this crisis is frankly laughable. And when I'm talking to people in the country, it's clear to me they've had enough, and it's time for a general election.
So how are you going to make that general election happen?
Well, in the end, the point that you're making is, in the end, that's up to Conservatives. But the idea that Conservative MPs think it's acceptable to, in smoke-filled, well, not smoke-filled rooms anymore, but in the rooms and corridors of this building, to force upon the country another Prime Minister and shutting the door on the British public is totally unacceptable. We need a general election.
And if they don't give you that, what can you, as an opposition, do? When Keir Starmer came to power, we were in the middle of another crisis, the COVID crisis, and he said, in the national interest, I will support what you do. Will Labour, in the national interest, support economic policies?
This is not an international pandemic, which came from because of what was happening in another country.
The cost of living crisis exists as well beyond
that. The crisis we're grappling with is soaring mortgage rates is a direct consequence of decisions taken by these Conservative MPs. And now you're telling me that Conservative MPs have the judgment to force upon the country another Prime Minister? No. People have had enough. We need a general election.
And like I say, if you can't get that, what do you as a party do?
Well, we'll continue making the argument. But I think you'll find that the British public will think it's unacceptable. There is a yearning for change in this country. People have had enough. And if Tory MPs think they can deny the British public their rightful say in this, I think they're in for they're in for a shock. People have had enough. We need a general election.
Jonathan Ashworth, who is the Shadow Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. That is Labour's position now. They say it is time for a general election.
Anushka, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's catch our breath, shall we, and just reflect on what we've been witnessing today. And a Prime Minister who'd only been in power for 45 days. She was elected to power by members of the Conservative Party who liked her economic plans with the promise of low tax and high growth. But what should have been the highlight of her political career quickly turned into a spectacular failure. Our political correspondent Libby Wiener looks now at the Prime Minister's rise and fall.
She only became Prime Minister on the 6th of September.
I have just accepted Her Majesty the Queen's kind invitation to form a new government.
And despite being the shortest-serving Prime Minister in British history, she still clocked up an impressive array of policy U-turns. Liz Truss was always prepared to change her mind. As a young Liberal Democrat, she opposed the monarchy.
Everybody in Britain should have the chance to be a somebody. But only one family can provide the head of state.
After becoming a Conservative and getting elected, she held a series of ministerial posts, but was for some time best remembered for her strident views on cheese.
We import 2/3 of our cheese. That is a disgrace.
Boris Johnson made her Foreign Secretary, which allowed her to pose for more than one photograph reminiscent of Margaret Thatcher. She said each one was a coincidence. Truss astutely stayed in post while others resigned over Boris Johnson's personal behaviour, putting her in a strong position going into the leadership race, even as she struggled to find her way out of her own launch event. Truss stood on a low-tax platform with a bit of Euroscepticism thrown in to remind them she'd changed her mind about Brexit too.
President Macron, friend or foe?
The jury's out.
Her economic policies exasperated her main opponent, Rishi Sunak.
It is. Liz, we have to be honest. We have to be honest. But borrowing your way out of inflation isn't a plan, it's a fairy tale.
But the Tory party membership believed it, and Truss was elected leader.
I will deliver a bold plan to cut taxes and grow our economy.
With her new Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, she quickly started cutting taxes, including the top rate of tax paid by the richest.
But I'm not going to cut the additional rate of tax today, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to abolish it altogether.
There was already huge unease at her first conference as leader.
So you won't change your mind on the 45p rate?
No.
A few hours later, she changed her mind on the 45p rate to prevent the row overshadowing her own speech.
I have 3 priorities for our economy: growth, growth and growth.
But financial markets thought that couldn't be achieved with unsustainable borrowing and were raising lending costs. The Bank of England had to protect pensions. And 10 days later, Truss sacked her Chancellor, U-turned on a pledge not to raise corporation tax, and held a short and ill-received press conference.
It is clear that parts of our mini-budget went further and faster than markets were expecting.
In a bid to shore up her crumbling authority, she asked Jeremy Hunt to be her Chancellor. He swiftly made her ditch most of the rest of her economic policy, leaving her with no credibility and little discernible programme. At Prime Minister's questions, she insisted she wasn't going anywhere.
Mr. Speaker, I am a fighter and not a quitter.
But then last night she lost another minister, sacking the Home Secretary, ostensibly over a security breach, but also after a fierce disagreement on immigration policy. Another disastrous misstep, trying to make a vote on fracking a confidence vote. More than 40 MPs failed to back her amid shocking allegations of bullying and intimidation in the voting lobbies. Overnight, a trickle of confidence letters had become a flood, MPs deciding enough was enough. She couldn't stay in post any longer. Libby Wiener, ITV News, Westminster.
Joined again by Robert. We've lost our umbrellas, thankfully, for a moment. The downpour, après le déluge, I think is the phrase. One of the issues that is bubbling up in the conversations, particularly now that we know that party members are going to get the vote, is whether there is a route back here for Boris Johnson.
Well, it is, as you say, the big thing we haven't talked about. Exclusive polling that actually we carried out for my show last night, Opinion Research did it for us, show that, believe it or not now, a majority of 2019 Tory voters think that the party was wrong to throw out Boris Johnson. Now, I don't think that is the settled view of Tory MPs. We've still got that investigation, parliamentary investigation, coming into whether he deliberately lied to MPs over those unlawful parties that were held there. But, you know, we should be under no illusion. Lots of voters love Boris Johnson. So one of the things that will be focusing Tory MPs' minds, and I think the majority of them think that it would probably be a disaster for him to come back is if he signals a desire to come back, how do they stop him getting on that ballot of Tory members? Because again, polling seems to indicate that if it comes down to two candidates, Boris Johnson versus Rishi Sunak, Boris Johnson versus Penny Mordaunt, and the final decision is taken in just a few days' time by Tory members, they'll probably choose Boris Johnson. I can't really believe I'm saying that.
We should mention he's in the Caribbean at the moment as well.
I'm having a very nice time with it. But I can't really believe I'm saying that, given, it was, not much more than, a year ago that he was engulfed in the mother of all crises. And yet it is a sensible thing to talk about. Could he come back? Now, if I'm going to put money on it, I think it's probably unlikely, because those close to him say that doesn't want to come back now. He's enjoying himself, making a lot of money, going to America and giving speeches. But frankly, we live through such extraordinary times. I can't rule out a Boris Johnson comeback.
OK, for the moment, we'll be back to you very shortly. Again, Robert, we can now cross to Belfast, and our reporter Tracy McGee is there. What reaction have you been hearing so far, Tracy?
Well, of course, while the arguments are raging about whether or not there should be another election, here in Northern Ireland, we are facing into an election which absolutely nobody wants. That's because Northern Ireland has not had a government since the last Stormont Assembly elections back in May. The main unionist party, the DUP, have been refusing to take up their place in government over the Northern Ireland Protocol. That's the special trading arrangements that have been set up here following Brexit. And they say they won't go back into government until the protocol is sorted out. The current Secretary of State, Chris Heaton-Harris, has made clear that he is under a legal obligation to call an election by October 28th. That's tomorrow week. And he says that is what he is planning to do. Now, the problem is that the Conservative Party, and so the government, is going to spend the next week trying to figure out who the leader of the party and Prime Minister is going to be. So there simply won't be the bandwidth to sort out the protocol and perhaps avert an election. Now, the other problem in all of this is that despite the election, the DUP saying that they will not go back into government, the other hope is that perhaps there could be some sort of resolution in talks with the EU, which are currently underway. But of course, all the instability in Westminster seems very unlikely that there could be an agreement before an election, perhaps even after election, leaving Northern Ireland in limbo.
OK, Tracy, thank you very much indeed for that. And we can cross now to Glasgow and our reporter Louise Scott to take us through what response has been there. I saw earlier that the First Minister was pretty quick out of the traps on her reaction on Twitter.
She certainly was. She said this is beyond a parody now, and there are no words to describe the utter shambles adequately. She is calling for a general election and says it is now a democratic imperative, and that is echoed by the Scottish Labour leader Anas Sarwar, who is saying this entire Tory government has to go. Now, the Scottish Conservative leader Douglas Ross, just this week, he said that he expected Liz Truss to lead them into the next general election. Well, he's now said in a statement that it is the right decision for her to resign, and there were no other options after recent events. He says we must now move forward quickly with the election of a new leader and Prime Minister, and says that it is vital that the party unites. Of course, this comes during another politically divisive time in Scottish politics, so it will be imperative for the Scottish Conservatives to find some sort of unionism in their party here.
Thank you very much indeed, Louise. Alongside me throughout this last hour has been Robert. I mean, 45 days in office. Have you ever witnessed a more calamitous collapse politically than this?
No. I mean, it's traditional on these occasions to try and say something positive about a Prime Minister's term in office. And we should point out that she did put in place a very expensive subsidy to all our energy bills, although as part of her calamitous U-turn, she's cut that subsidy from 2 years down to 6 months. But I'm afraid what people will remember about those 45 days is chaos, and in particular a mini budget which was actually a huge budget of tax cuts that blew up the markets, forced up interest rates, ruined the party's reputation for economic competence, and ultimately led to that extraordinary statement we saw just an hour or so ago, an hour and a half, where she says, I've no longer got a mandate, I've got to go.
And it's all done. It's all done. Well, we will be coming back to you throughout the day, of course. Thank you very much indeed, Robert, for all of your latest lines and your take on what we've witnessed, bringing to an end of our special coverage on yet another day of high drama here in Westminster. This afternoon, Liz Truss came out of number 10 Downing Street and announced she was resigning as Prime Minister after just 45 days in office. She said she was no longer able to deliver the mandate on which she was elected leader of the Conservative Party. So now the race is on to find her successor, with the result of that contest in which the party members will have a vote expected by the end of next week. Charlene will be back with the evening news at 6:30, but for now, with all the latest from Downing Street, and of course you can keep up to date with all the events on our website, from all of us here and across Westminster on another historic day in Downing Street. Goodbye.